Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Robin Lewis, founder and CEO of the Robin Report, which, by the way, I always like to remind our audience that it is really much more than just a daily report. It really is what we call a knowledge platform from which we communicate thought leadership on various strategic topics through the reports, yes, but also these podcasts. And we do webinars and also, hopefully in the future, some live events. And along with our chief strategist, Shelley Kohan, who's also a professor at FIT and Syracuse University, we welcome you to our conversation on the topic of personalization. It's not nice, it's a necessity. So a big welcome to Sarah McVittie, founder and CEO of Dressipi, which is a tech solution firm that turns that buzzword into reality. They also have been selected to join our Innovators Network, which consists of expert high-tech solutions-driven companies. So, Sarah, we're honored and glad you could join us today. We really do appreciate it. But before Shelley and I kind of bombard you with questions, please give us a brief overview of what you do, why you do it, and what difference does it make?
Sure. So firstly, thank you so much for having me. It's gorgeous to be here. So I think in terms of what we do at Dressipi, we do personalization, but we're really driving a step change in personalization, particularly for apparel, e-commerce. And I think what's important is, we really understand the kind of unique complexities that makes apparel and fashion so completely different to every other category. So if you think about seasonality, trends, weather, body shape, sizes, taste preferences, and by understanding that, we really help those retailers to show every visitor the right item at the right time in the right size, so that they are more likely to buy and keep those items. And I think at the core of what we're trying to do, we kind of genuinely believe that apparel retailing can be and should be better for everybody. So it's about reinventing that shopping experience with genuinely unbeatable predictions and personalization, but not so you're just showing your best-selling pair of tights, but you're showing stuff that is gorgeous and aspirational. And it really does help those retailers stay competitive, and it helps to avoid them being left behind. And actually what we're seeing now for the retailers that are using our solution, they're now seeing kind of revenue uplifts of kind of like 12%. And because we add in kind of this size fragmentation, the return rate, seeing profit increases of up to 21% as well. So it's really good.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Very good. So in the upcoming cost of living crisis, which looks like we're headed into, profit increases of 21% would be amazing, Sarah. So can you expand a little more on what rising inflation will mean for retailers?
Yeah, I probably don't need to teach them to suck eggs here, but obviously our industry is going through a huge period of transformation. There are pressures on pricing, pressures on the supply chain. And I think the other thing that we're seeing is as brands become more accessible globally, the consumer is kind of increasingly fickle. And so they've got to fight a lot harder to get those customers in. And when they get them in, you've got to keep them, right? So I think from a customer's point of view, as the cost of living crisis starts to kick in, obviously fashion is a discretionary purchase, and so you've got less disposable income. And so it is absolutely vital that when you spent the money to get the customer to your site, you have to convert them. You have to be able to say, right, they come to my site to buy something. What is it? Let's put the right product in front of them. And it's never been more important. You need to make sure that every customer is coming and they are as likely as possible to buy that one thing from you and not anyone else.
Yeah, and I think the other really big key here is convenience. So there's been a lot of data across retailers that's really confirmed that shoppers are taking less trips to the stores. And in some cases, they're making larger purchases per trip, but certainly making less trips to the store. And retailers that have really tried to add personalization or customization, they seem to still be trying to figure out how to make it work. And, the software tech companies, the streaming companies, Netflix, they've figured it out in personalization in terms of recommendation engines, but retailers still seem to be a bit behind. And I would also say that personalization is a very broad topic. So how would you describe it?
Yes, I think you're right. It is a very broad topic. And I think understanding, so personalization at the core of what it means is that you are able to hyper personalize every single bit of the journey to every single customer in a way that is unique to them. But I think if you look at kind of online shopping in the apparel industry, I mean, it's quite embarrassing. It's still stuck in the 1990s. You know, you look at, so the personalization efforts they're just scratching the surface, and they're really lacking the relevance that's so important. And it's not enough to survive the next big industry disruptor. You know, if you think, so a recent survey, I think 21% of consumers think that personalization is improving on retail sites, on apparel. It's just not good enough. And I think currently you've got this very flat journey. It's still very Amazon, 1990s, you've got a kind of PLP, PDP basket, but that's not how we shop. You know, they want inspirational, personalized journeys that also follow the narrative of the retailer. And customers, as you say, expect that hyper personalization. So companies like Netflix, like Spotify, they've driven those expectations, and retailers need to take those learnings from those companies, and they need to redefine that discovery process, but in the context of fashion, understanding that it is very different, and it's much harder to do. But that's what we do. We're like the kind of Netflix level personalization for the apparel industry, really. So I think, you know, for us, it's understanding kind of what that looks like, and making sure that we can provide all the necessary content, so that on the front end, whenever a customer lands, wherever they land, they're seeing this lovely hyper personalized, that every single customer will have their own unique journey wherever they go through the site. And I think what's becoming apparent now, you look at Shein, you look at some of these other companies which are completely data driven. If you don't get on with it, these retailers won't exist, right? So it's never been more important to get it right.
Sarah, you know, I totally agree. I wrote an article called, and the title was Personalization, the Next and Biggest Thing. And I wrote that back in 2016. And, you know, like everything tech, Sarah, so many of our senior leadership across the industry still seem to be just catching up, just to simply understand whatever technology solution comes down the pike. At least that's been my observation. Mm-hmm. And are you seeing the same thing, or are you beginning to see some progress? And are there some out there who are really doing personalization very well?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? So I think there's a few things there. So I think firstly, most recommendation engines that have been built historically have been built with things like, you know, electronics on Amazon, or books or films. And if you think about how those industries behave, they're completely different to fashion. So if I read a book and love that book, or I watch a film and love that film, my opinion doesn't really change. Whether I'm 50, 90, 80, I can still get hold of it, I still like it, I can still recommend it. Whereas fashion's so completely different. Now, what we buy and wear in the summer is different to what we buy and wear in the winter. I've had 2 kids, so what I am comfortable and what is appropriate for me is very different to what it was, you know, 10 years ago. And then my preferences change, and then, you know, all different sizes and shapes. So it's just a far more dynamic problem. Then you've got this added complexity where 33% of most retailers' products are new every single month, right? So you can't rely on clicks and purchases to understand what you're going to like. So you've got to dig deeper and be smarter about that. So there's the actual kind of complexity of building the algorithms, number one. But secondly, you've got most retailers that, you know, they are, for all very good reasons, on these legacy platforms that are very hard to change. And so most of them are using some kind of generic recommender which sits within that platform. And obviously those generic recommenders are built for all retail categories. They're not specifically built to solve some of those very specific nuances that are very different for apparel. But yeah, what we're seeing now is those things are starting to change. You're getting this kind of very slow but steady move to the kind of headless architecture. So whether it's Commerce Tools or Shopify Plus, where that you're starting to see that decoupling of the front end and back end, which gives those retailers so much more flexibility to change the journey, to deliver a journey that is meaningful. So on that side, we've always been API first, which means that we can pass our APIs through to, we've got about 20 different APIs that a retailer can consume. And it's just so much more flexible for them. And in fact, we've just built a demo for a very large global retailer, just showcasing just how powerful that can be. So I think from our point of view, it's about understanding how do you take every single visitor and how do you understand their intent in as fast as real time as possible, ensuring that every customer can have this very individual, personalized journey. But also the thing that's important about fashion, you have to be able to continue the brand story and the narrative. So it's about being able to combine the smarts of the AI with the brand narrative. So if you can imagine, so 3 examples. So one, you've got a customer, typically lots of customers are now arriving from Google Shopping, from social media sites, and they're landing on the product detail page. Now that product detail page currently has been designed at the end of the journey. So you come to the home page, you go to the listing pages, you click on the detail page, and then you check out. However, if you're landing on that product page, there's nowhere else for you to go. So you need to create jumping off points. So did they come because it was the occasion of the dress or the color or the style? What was it about that? And you need to allow them to jump off and to go on and carry on that journey, but always in the narrative of that customer. Equally, if you can imagine hashtags on social media, they should be clickable. They should take you through to a personalized landing page where you then see your best edit or whatever that content or story or brand narrative is. And then equally, if you can imagine all your past purchases are stored in your wardrobe, so that as you're shopping around, you can see how these new items work with things you already own. It's trying to create an experience that is as close to possible as to how we ordinarily shop, whether we're in store or not, and getting that editorial piece in there as well. And it definitely works. Our clients are seeing kind of average growth of around 26% quarter on quarter. So it's good. Yeah.
Sarah, that's just an amazing story, and I loved how you made it so easy for our audience to understand. And I do think headless architecture is a game changer. Absolutely. So thanks for really explaining and talking about that. One of the things that I would have to ask you about, because it is a pain point with especially online retailers, according to the National Retail Federation and APRIS Retail, returns jumped to an average of almost 17% in 2021. That's 7 points higher than just a year ago, and equates to about $750 billion worth of merchandise. So as we go into the run-up to holiday where returns get even higher, not to mention if we just segment out the online returns, the rate is even north of 20% and certainly more costly. So the other flip side of that, customers expect as a fundamental factor or feature of shopping online, free returns, period. They want free returns. So my kind of philosophy is retailers have to figure out to sell the right product first, including size, color, and feature. So I'm sure that Dressipi deals with the returns issue. I would imagine you have a point of view on this topic. And what can you say for retailers? It's a real pain point.
Yeah, it is, right. And I think you're right. It is increasingly important for all retailers to reduce their returns at a time where more than ever, they need to protect their profits, and especially as those costs of the returns and the delivery are going up as well. And actually, we see it kind of here in the UK. Zara has actually started charging consumers for the returns. I think you're right. Kind of returns are a natural cost of doing business online, but there is so much fat in that number. And I think also, if you look at kind of the low to mid-price retailers, increasing your prices will also increase your return rate. So every £1 increase in price in the UK, you see a 0.4% increase in return rate. So it's really understanding, and we've done a lot of work on this. There's no point helping retailers to increase their revenue if you're not also reducing the return rate, because your net benefit is actually negative, if that makes sense. So you need to be growing the revenue and reducing the return rate. So making sure that customers only buy things they're going to buy and keep as much as possible. And actually, when we test our recommendations versus the normal content in the site, customers who buy through our recommendations return 10 to 15% less than normal. So that has a kind of 2-3 percentage point impact on the return rate, which is significant, right? So I think it's really important to understand and to break the problem down and to understand where the low-hanging fruit is.
Yeah, I have to throw a personal example here of this issue. 3 times in the last month, my wife and I had to return items that we realized were the wrong items, and one was a pair of jeans that didn't fit from a well-known brand. The other two were from Amazon, but in all three cases, they just told us to keep the items rather than return them.
Yeah.
And they sent us the right size of jeans for me, and the other two mistakes, they removed the charges. And I think this might become a standard way of dealing with this. You know, it's like the credit card companies, they building defaults into their annual P&Ls based on, you know, historical amounts.
Right.
But, you know, this increasing cost of returns and the predicted increase in returns is really a scary space. Is there anything else that retailers can do, Sarah?
Yeah, so obviously, I mean, there is sort of no silver bullet, but I think there are some very simple things that retailers can do in the first instance. So we, one of the things we do with our service is we create lots of extra product data that's very consistent, and it allows us to understand every single product as a set of features. And then we capture lots of customer data. So then we do an initial piece of analysis where we really try, and I think a lot of retailers go into solve the problem without taking the time to state the problem first of all. So people assume it's sizing, whereas actually, in fact, you know, if 70% of your revenue is coming from your top 30% of the customers, they know their size. So if you do the analysis and you understand genuinely why, and you can see it in the data, why are customers returning items? Is it a style issue, a size issue? Is it them wardrobing at home? Have you look at the customers? Typically, there's a very small number of customers who are responsible for a very large chunk of your returns. Some of them are very some of them are very profitable, and some of them are not. So just don't email those guys. I mean, there's lots of things you can do. And then actually, when you look at each product category and you plot each SKU over volume and return rate, typically you've got these very high volume, high returning products. And there's something about those products when you overlay the features that for some reason doesn't work for that customer base. So there's lots of things retailers should be and could be doing today. And normally there's 3 or 4 percentage points you can just cut out right there just by understanding where the low hanging fruit is. And so I think it's really important to get the data in place first, and then use that data and ask the right questions. So the question should be, how do I reduce my returns by 1%? Not, so it's really about understanding and then digging into the data to see what that solution is. So we always start with the return rate profile, and then we dig into those, and we build that for all of our clients.
Well, you know, Sarah, if Dressipi can solve the return conundrum, obviously massive feat for retail, especially in the upcoming cost of living crisis. And it's great to see a company that's able to deliver the customer the best possible experience, but also while growing the revenue and bottom line.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that the two, when you're working with apparel retailers, the two have to work hand in hand. And because the margins are the way they are, because the return rates are the way they are, because size fragmentations and markdowns are where they are, it's really important that as a vendor you understand how the money flows through the P&L. And so for us, our recommendations will never push a product that isn't right for the customer just to increase conversion if that ultimately leads to an increase in returns as well. So I think the other thing, when you've got that extra detail on the product data, it's much easier to understand a customer's true intent and make much better data-driven decisions. So, I mean, one example, it's a simple example, but if you take necklines, for example, so we've got about 34 different necklines that we annotate into our products. Now, if you've got a lady who's got a large bust, it doesn't matter whether they're 19, 30 or 60, they will return a crew neck 5% more than they will a round neck or a scoop neck. Now, if you don't understand the difference between those, that never comes out in the wash, right? So it's really important to understand what those return rate propensities mean for each customer with each feature. And then when you overlay the preferences, then you are able to build a much better sense of what that looks like. And I think that's why we focus solely on apparel, because it is so different. And the reason we get such good results is because we are completely focused in that area.
And Sarah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, using the data-driven actual, information to analyze products down to the detail that you're talking about Makes perfect sense. I think, you know, some of the problem with a lot of retailers is they're using customer survey data, even asking customers up front, would you buy this A or would you buy B? So we're asking customers for input. Is many times customers don't even know what they want.
Yeah.
You know, it's a factor that they don't even really know or consider, or they say they want one thing. I definitely want a V-neck, but when they go to the store, they buy the, you know, scoop neck. So I think that's a big issue, the customer survey data. And they're not trying to purposely mislead the retailer. Obviously, they just really don't know, you know, what specific features they actually want to wear. One may look good, but it may not look good on the customer. And I would also say sizes vary by retailer. Everyone knows this. So there's like no one solution for all retailers, you know, which is why personalization really needs to be built by retailer and customer preferences. It's a very complex issue for retailers. So I'd love if you could dig a little deeper into some of the problems that retailers have in fashion apparel.
Yeah, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think understanding that we consume and buy fashion apparel in very different ways to every other category. You know, when you're buying a lawnmower, you don't really care whether it works or goes with your clippers, and it's a very different kind of sense of how you purchase. So if you think about fashion, we typically, you know, we buy things typically to go with things we already own. So understanding how things work together and how outfits work, and understanding the versatility of a product. So can I wear that white tuxedo jacket in the evening as well as at work? And so it's understanding how those tastes and preferences change. And to your point, you know, when you have a survey, people will say, yeah, I'm definitely city chic. And then you look at how they actually behave, and it's very, very different. So, and then, you know, we similarly, fashion is a kind of confidence thing, right? So we all aspire to, so if you're really confident, you don't want any advice. You just want the retailer to know that they know you and that you're going to get your best edit of their stuff. Whereas if you're not confident, you'll be like, oh, I'm not sure, and you won't make that purchase. And it's a kind of linear graph, right? So how do you give the confidence to those, and how do you build and understand how, and who should they be aligned to in terms of what's going to work for them and how that works? And I think, again, once you understand the products at that feature level, and you've built all that, you've got the clicks and the purchases and returns, you start to build this kind of propensity model for every single customer or visitor at a feature, garment, category and department level. So for example, we would know that you love white shirts but hate white jeans, and it's not that you like or dislike white, but you have a preference at a category level, and that matters, right? So that's one thing. Secondly, I mean, I mentioned this before, but it's the only category where you've got such a high turnover of new products. You've got 33% on average of products which are new every single month. Now, that doesn't happen anywhere else. So you can't recommend something in a typical world unless you've got clicks and purchases on that thing. But however, if you understand that new product as a set of features, I already know that you love white shirts with this collar and that neckline or whatever it is. I already know that you don't like those jeans in that color. So no product's ever new. So it's just much easier to deliver recommendations even with your completely new in season stock. And then you've got, I suppose, the added complication where the business of fashion is complex. So when you're buying, I know, dresses, if you're buying, so I keep using this lawnmower example, but if you're buying a lawnmower, you can go and buy 5,000 units of lawnmower, that's it, job done, you go and sell those lawnmowers. If you're buying your 5,000 units for dress, how many should you buy in a size 4, 6, 8, 10, 12? And if you get that size ratio wrong, it fragments, and then you've got markdowns and discounting. So all of those things are complex. And then the return rate. So why are things being returned? How do you stop that being returned? So it is very dynamic. It's not static like other categories. And so I think that's why people have to take a more considered approach when it comes to really thinking about how they want those journeys to work within their own brand. Sorry.
Well, you know, you're talking about the bottom line, and you know what you do, Sarah, with the Dressipi is incredible. And I mean, it really changing the face of retailing. And obviously you're very passionate about what you're delivering. So is there any advice that you would like to give to brands who have not started or are the beginning of their personalization journey?
So much. Yeah, I think, I think firstly, you can't sit back and do nothing. We've got to call time on these old school fashion e-commerce experiences. I think data-driven retailing is here and it's here to stay. And I think Shein is a perfect example. Like, unlike any other apparel retail business, the founder's background is not in the rag trade. He's a data guy through and through, right? He's an SEO guy. So they crunch the numbers, they build what works. Everything is data-driven, and you don't need to lose the aspiration and the brand piece, but you do need to use the data to drive better decision making. And I think, so the first thing I'd say is get your data house in order. So most retailers spend a lot of time focusing on their customer data, and they fail to appreciate or understand enough about the thing their customers actually care about and why they come to their site, which is their product, right? So you need to understand as much about your products as you do about your customers. And then once you have those two data sets in place, then you need to understand, how do you maximize the interaction between those two data sets so that you can drive and affect real change? So your question might be, how do I get each customer to buy one more thing? It's in the data, right? So how do I deliver a 1% reduction in return rate? It's in the data. So how do I reduce size fragmentation? How do I reduce markdowns? It's all there. And that's personalization done well should be doing that for you. So if you've got fragmented stock, but I know this customer's a size 4 and you've got one size 4 left, and she's going to love it, she should see it. It shouldn't be at the bottom of the page, right? So it should be delivered so that it is genuinely, really delivering on each customer in the way that's relevant for them. And I think retailers need to move quickly, or I think times will get much tougher for them. And then when it comes to returns, somebody needs to own the returns in the business. Very often we find that everyone hates returns. Everyone knows it's a problem, but nobody actually owns that as a metric. So I think it kind of sits in too many different places. So I think, so on the returns piece, I think that's one piece. But then when it comes to personalization, I think retailers really do need to think about the product discovery journey that works for their brand and for their customer, and everyone will be different. And they need to then figure out how they go about delivering that journey that works for them. And I think, there's lots of people who offer personalization, but it's segmentation. So understand when you're buying something which is genuinely personalized to each customer versus here's a segment of users that are men or women or kids or whatever. So understand where you sit in that, because your results will be different depending on how personalized it is.
Yeah, very good points. Thank you. And Sarah, there's a phrase, build or buy. This is a big discussion some major retailers have about whether they should build their own tech solutions in-house, or should they go to third parties like Dressipi. Nike, for example, acquired Select, C-E-L-E-C-T, I'm sure you're probably aware of them.
Yeah.
And they were kind of a leader in inventory optimization. Anyway, the return on investment on that buy would be immediate versus Nike spending time and money building their own. In my opinion, the world is moving so fast today and transforming in so many ways that I don't think companies have the time to build their own. Look at Amazon. There's a perfect example. They're out there with all those test stores, and guess what? The new CEO is closing them down because they haven't moved 1 foot forward. I mean, I said they should have bought Kohl's, and therefore they would buy 1,155 physical locations that are both for shopping and distribution. Yeah. And they will also be acquiring the expertise and the knowledge of the management team there. Anyway, we go on and on about that. But so companies that they just don't have time to build everything. Some of them do and are, but the others are being left in the dust as their competitors obviously speed ahead. Anyway, Sarah, I want to give a special thanks to you and Dressipi for sharing your knowledge and insights on this week's topic of personalization. I learned so much today, and I'm sure our audience did as well. So thanks again, Sarah. Very, very great conversation with you.
And Sarah, I love your passion. You're just so energetic. I love spending time with you. It's just so funny and you're so knowledgeable. And I can't get over your white shirt, white jean example, because that is me. I love white shirts.
Yeah, I gotta
but
get
I
you
will
on.
not wear white jeans. Why? Because I don't trust myself. I'm going to get them dirty, you know? So
Exactly.
that was a great example and that really resonated with me. So thank you for that. And by the way, are you going to be at the NRF show?
Yeah, we will. Absolutely. So we will be, if anyone's around, booth 947 on level 1. And if anyone wants to email us and learn more, and I'm happy to share more if that's helpful, it's sarah@dressipi.com.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, so much. So Sarah.
Yes, that's correct.
Dressipi.com. That's how you can find Sarah. Anyway, for our listeners, you can find more of our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and of course, the robinreport.com. And look for us on YouTube, where we broadcast our podcast as well. And please follow us on social media, link in with us, follow us on Twitter to hear about the latest thoughts with the industry.
And I want to give a final thanks to you, Sarah, and our audience for attending. And as I always do, if any of you are listening and viewing have a topic that you would like Shelley and I to cover in one of our podcasts, please email me at robin@therobinreport.com. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.